Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Community Keynotes. This marks the first episode of our second season. My name is Melissa Majors. I'm the founder of Community Keynotes and so blessed to be the coach to all the Community Keynote speakers. Now, since our first season, we have received so many incredible notes of encouragement about how this show has positively touched people's lives. It's so fulfilling. It wouldn't be possible, however, without the genius of my co-producer, the Amani Roberts. Welcome back, Amani.
Thank you. Very excited to be here and excited for season 2. Here we go.
Absolutely. Now, listen, you have heard Heather's story, our featured speaker today. Now, without giving it away, what were you feeling as you were listening to her story?
I was feeling a need to share it with as many people as I could that needed to hear this message and the courage that was displayed on both people's parts.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Thank you for not giving it away. Yeah, Heather has to dig really deep to share the courage and bravery to share this story. This episode is not for entertainment's sake, viewers. It is not. And so she deserves your undivided attention. And so I encourage you to lean in and absorb this story. But first, from wherever you're watching, whether it's LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, put your hands on the keyboard and send an encouraging note to Heather and help me welcome her, Heather Reid, to the Community Keynote stage.
Hello, Melissa, and hello, Amani. Thank you. It was about midnight on a Tuesday night, about 3.5 years ago, that the phone rang. We knew, my husband and I knew by the ringtone, that it was our daughter calling. She was away, hours and hours and hours away at university, and about 6 weeks away from graduating. She had a couple of weeks of classes and then a month of exams left. And we knew that she had been out that night. I picked up the phone as I always do. Hello, sweetie. And there was absolutely no response. And then all I heard on the other end was hysterical, high-pitched crying and her gasping for her breath. And of course, I filled it with, "What's wrong? Are you okay? What's happened? Tell me, sweetie." She finally got the words out. "Mom, he raped me." Time stood still. I was instantly filled with both blinding rage, but also incredibly profound sadness. My husband and I talked to her on the phone that night, and it felt like it was hours, but I'm sure it was just minutes. She revealed to us that she had been choked, she had been slapped, she had been bitten, and she had been raped. It was truly a heinous, horrible, unthinkable act that she had had to endure. I honestly don't know how we ever had the courage to hang up the phone that night, but we did. She insisted to us on that phone call that she wanted to finish the last few days or last few weeks of her classes. But after another devastating phone call on the Thursday, we knew, and more importantly, she knew then, that help was urgently needed. I boarded the train the next morning to go get her. I'm pretty sure I held my breath for the whole 11 hours of that train ride, until I was able to actually just scoop her up in my arms and tell her that we loved her, tell her that she was safe with us, and most importantly, that she was going to be all right. I packed up our daughter, her cat, and as many of her belongings that I could shove in her little car, and I brought her home. I brought her home to her family who loved on her, and ultimately I brought her home to a SWAT team of professionals, of trauma specialists that knew exactly what to do. They knew what to say, and they knew what she needed. As a parent, it was a horrific thing to go through. But I'm really happy to say that our daughter is doing extremely well. 3.5 years later, she still surrounds herself with professionals who help her and support her when things resurface. We know it took so much courage for her to reach out, to call home. It took so much courage to call home and she knew that she could call home. She knew that it was safe to call home. And I know that she knew it was safe to call home because of two things. One, she knew my story. And more important to that, she had been told many, many, many times, you can tell Dad and I anything, anytime, anywhere. We told our kids that repeatedly. You can tell us anything, anytime, anywhere. So now you might be thinking, well, what is my story? Well, 30 years earlier, ironically at the exact same age as our daughter, I too was raped. It was the spring of '87, and I was hired to work as a, quote, field assistant for 2 male graduate students. The 3 of us lived in a cottage on the beach for almost 3 months. And we spent the time out in the sun and in the sand, measuring the effects of wind erosion on the sand dunes on the beach. And I can remember so vividly, it was a glorious way to spend the summer. It was my dream job. But it was glorious until it was about a week before our field season at the cottage was to come to an end. And it was early, mid-July. There was a blowout party at our cottage. All of the department's graduate students were invited to this party, and you can imagine, since we were on the beach in a cottage, that we were the very cool place to hang out that weekend. There must have been 50, 60, 70 people out on the beach and in the house, in the cottage. I didn't know any of them. They were all graduate students, and I was the only undergraduate. On the Saturday night, the booze had been flowing all day. And the music, to me, and for those that know me, you know my taste in music, the music was blaring and it was thumping. It was so loud. One of my field supervisors, one of my direct reports, John, started forcibly pushing me down the hallway in the cottage. He was strong. He was drunk, but he seemed really, really angry. And he shoved me hard down the hallway, and he shoved me into his bedroom. The room was completely pitch black. And he shoved me onto his bed, which was up against the wall. And I can remember the cold paneling up against my arm and at one point up against my cheek. And I can remember that he shoved my face into the pillow because I kept screaming, no, no. And I can also remember thinking that no one was ever going to hear me because the damn music was thumping so loudly. There were so many people there at that party, and yet no one was there for me. Again, it was only a matter of minutes, but it felt like it was a lifetime. My virginity was stolen from me that night. Something that I had held so sacred to me was stolen by someone completely insignificant to me. I remember so much about that summer job before that night. I remember it was a dream job and I loved what we were doing. But I barely remember anything after that night for what would be weeks and months. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain what had happened to me. I didn't have any words, and I went completely numb. And in fact, it was about 8 weeks later, school was just starting up again, that I went to the campus doctor because I wasn't feeling well. And as doctors do, she said, well, is there any possibility that you could be pregnant? And it was in that exact moment, it was as someone had walked in and switched on the light. It was only in that moment that I actually fully realized what had happened to me, what John had done to me, and that in fact, I actually could be pregnant. I had been so naive, so numb, so void of any feelings over that summer, so much in denial of what had happened to me, I hadn't even considered the possibility that I could be pregnant. And in fact, I was. I was pregnant because of the rape. And I can say to you that I absolutely abhorred the fact that I was pregnant because of the rape. It was repulsive to me. And at 13 weeks, the pregnancy was ended, medically terminated. There were no trauma services offered to me. There was no counseling available to me. There was no therapy available. It was simply a clinical, medical, lonely procedure done at an out-of-town hospital. For so many reasons, back 30 years ago, I couldn't imagine ever telling my parents or my sisters about what had happened to me or what I was going through. The only person in the world who knew anything at that time was my best friend. She was studying to be a nurse, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. She literally held my hand through everything. For more than a year, my best friend was the only person on the planet who knew what was happening. She was my anchor and she was my lifeline. And although we've never specifically spoken about that time again, she knows that I will be forever grateful. I remind her all of the time of what she means to me. She was my lifeline. The second person in the world to know about this was my husband-to-be, who I'm happy to say we're still married 31 years later. I've known him since we were 12, but we didn't start dating until about a year and a half after the rape. It was such a relief to tell a second person, and especially to tell him. There was no shame, there was no blame that came from him. It was just complete understanding and whatever I needed. And then it was at least 8 years before, and actually I had 2 toddlers of my own at this point, before I finally broke the silence. It was as if a dam had kind of come unleashed. And I told my parents and my sisters. Because while I thought I was dealing okay with things on my own, the sadness, the anger, the depression, the silence, it was literally eating me up. My single choice of coping was to eat. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't gamble. My personal numbing agent of choice was to eat. I numbed myself every single day with food, and I fed my sadness inside of me, that void, all the way up to 385 pounds. For more than 2 decades, I played small. I worked really hard at playing small, and I tried really hard to hide. And yet, ironically, as someone said to me, I couldn't hide because of my sheer physical size. I wanted to be invisible physically, and yet everything inside of me actually was begging to be heard, to be seen, to be understood, and to be validated and respected for what I had been through. And for me, 7 years ago, although it was an incredibly painful time for me, everything kind of just came to a big head. And for a lot of reasons, I was a hot mess at that point. But I made the decision. I finally was going to address the sadness. I was going to address the trauma inside of me. I was going to address my weight. And I was going to find myself again. I'm happy to say that these past 7 years have been a journey of healing and restoring my health. And I'm not where I want to be, but I know I'm going to get there. And through opportunities like this with Melissa and Community Keynotes, I have the opportunity now to be heard. So, 3.5 years ago on that Tuesday night when we got the call from our daughter, you can imagine how it felt for me. It felt like I had actually been sucker punched in the gut. Her words literally pulled the air right out of my lungs. My pain for her was absolutely immediate. And my own pain came back to me that night like an avalanche. However, what I knew instantly that night was that my daughter's journey, her journey to healing, was going to be incredibly different than my own. You could say that the mama bear surfaced in me that night. She was going to be surrounded by professionals. She was going to be supported by her family. She was going to be heard whenever she needed to be heard. There was no way on earth that she was going to endure this trauma in silence. There was absolutely no way on earth that she was going to endure this trauma alone. As I said earlier, I am so proud of the courage that she had to call home, to reach out. I know that that takes tremendous courage. And I also know that she knew it was safe to call home. She knew it was safe because she'd grown up knowing my story, and she'd heard repeatedly anything, anytime, anywhere. And I know that the conviction for us as parents, for my husband and I, to repeatedly say that to our kids, anything, anytime, anywhere, was born out of my trauma. We didn't want our kids to ever feel like there was anything that they had to go through by themselves. For decades, I have literally carried the weight of the devastating trauma and of the devastating effect of not talking openly about my trauma. And we never, ever wanted that for our kids. So in speaking about these stories, and I want you to know that I have the full blessing of our daughter, who you'll meet in a moment, but I want to say why I feel compelled to share. I, or my daughter for that matter, we're not looking for your pity or your sympathy, but rather I am looking to use my own voice at this stage in my life. And I couldn't find or express words to say it any better than Thordis Alva, a rape victim herself, who said in a TED Women Talk in 2016, she said, "Breaking your silence is never easy. I realize that even the most traumatic experience of my life is still a testament to my privilege, because I can talk openly about it without being ostracized or even killed. But with that privilege of having a voice comes the responsibility of using it. That's the least I owe my fellow survivors who can't." To me, those are truly profound words, and they articulate my reason for sharing my story and why I am participating in Community Keynote. So what do I want you, the audience, to know or to do? There's just two simple things. The first, if you are a survivor of trauma, please do not suffer in silence. Please seek out a trusted friend, and please seek out professionals. Suffering in silence only perpetuates the trauma. To me, I know now that nothing cannot be said out loud. I know now that there should be nothing that you cannot say out loud. To me, when trauma comes out of the darkness, it loosens its grip on you. To me, the trauma doesn't disappear completely. The images will never leave my mind, but they don't own me in the same way. By talking about it, I'm not owned by that trauma. The second thing is, if you are a parent with children, or you're simply a human being with people that you love, please consider living by the mantra, anything, anytime, anywhere. I really hope that you never need to hear traumatic news, but knowing that your child or your loved one is able to come to you and confide in you with their innermost thoughts is a gift to you both. You never know when your willingness to listen to anything might be the very lifeline that they need. When I was preparing for this, I looked up anything, anytime, anywhere, because I've often wondered, well, where did my husband and I get those 3 words from? And it was actually written by Bruce Cockburn in 2004 as the lyrics to a love song. And my kids would have been about 9 and 7 at that point, so it makes sense that we latched on to those 3 words. And I'll finish with these words. Tell me what you need. I will surely come through. Anything, anytime, anywhere. For you, anything, anytime, anywhere. Thank you.
Heather. So I want to say on behalf of everyone who is watching, thank you. And I'm sorry for what you experienced. I'm sorry that you went through that. But as a result of you sharing your story today, I have complete faith that you have sparked healing for a lot of people. There's purpose in you sharing the story, and
Yep.
I'm so grateful for it. Thank you. Well done. We'll come back and talk to you a little bit in just a bit, you
Awesome.
and Kaylin.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I want to let you know that Heather has chosen a charity. We do a fundraiser on every Community Keynotes episode. And today we are doing a fundraiser for ANOVA. ANOVA is an organization based in London, Ontario, Canada. They provide safe places and shelter and support and counseling and resources for abused women, their children, and all oppressed individuals to find a new start. ANOVA is part of the SWAT team of support that Heather's daughter, Kaylin, received. And so if you can find it in your heart to give, if we can bring up that give slide there, Amani, it's really easy. You can text, you can scan, or you can go to givebutter.com/community keynotes. 60% of your proceeds will go directly to ANOVA. 40% of the proceeds will be used to fund the production of community keynotes. Every penny matters. So please consider giving and gifting your heart to this fundraiser. We have another fun way for you to give and contribute to the cause. Heather's story has inspired a line of merchandise based on her story and her quotes. And so we'd love for you to go to storystore.us and check out the merchandise that we have available, not just on Heather's story or inspired by Heather's story, but all of the community keynote speakers. And 10% of all the proceeds benefit the charity of choice. And again, the proceeds benefit ANOVA, A Future Without Violence, thanks to Heather's story. And so with that, I would love now to turn it back over to Amani and introduce you to Kaylin and also bring Heather back. Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. Excellent job, Heather. Very proud of you. Well done. We're going to have a couple of questions for you and then for Kaylin as well. So hello, Kaylin. How are we doing there?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
All right. Great to see you. Doing well. My first question for Heather is you spoke about your best friend who was there for you for that entire year after what you went through. If you could speak to her today, what would you say to her?
Well, the kids know her as Auntie Fran, even though she's not technically an aunt, but Auntie Fran. They grew up knowing Auntie Fran, and they grew up knowing the gift that Auntie Fran had given to me. So I would tell her what I've always told her. I would thank her for her willingness to be there. No questions asked. We actually both grew up in families of faith, and she just didn't question anything. There was no judgment. And it was just complete love. Whatever I needed, she dropped anything at any point. So I would say to her, you know that you are my lifeline. and I would do anything to the ends of the earth for her.
Excellent. Now, if you were able to meet Heather at age 18, we'll say 18, in a coffee shop, based on what you know now, what would you share with younger Heather?
I would share that this was something that was done to me. This was not about me. This was not something that I asked for. This was not something that I had set up, if you will. It was done to me. And I would say that silence is the enemy. Silence is truly when it can capture you and hold you in the dark, and it can hold you down. And I would say that there's nothing that can't be said out loud. That getting it out and getting perspective is so valuable, because your mind can do some pretty awful things when it's left to its own vices.
I agree completely. Silence, definitely. Kaylin, first question for you. Where did you get the courage to call home that night?
Honestly, I don't know if I could give you a real answer. It really wasn't even a second thought. The first thought was, I need mom and dad. And I think I agree with what my mom said. Being told anything, anytime, anywhere. And not only did they say it, but they always proved it growing up. We had, an open door policy in our home that literally anything could be brought to mom or dad. The smallest thing from a paper cut to the big event like my assault. And they proved it time and time again. It wasn't just empty words. They really did mean it. So
Great. Thanks for sharing. So, Heather, what would you share to people who maybe have been through a similar experience but are losing hope that they can recover? What would your message be to them?
That recovery is not a one size fits all. That recovery is a very personal journey. And just because I can talk about it doesn't mean that someone else ever needs to talk about it publicly. That it's really, there's no right way to healing. It's simply your way. And I would say that you need to be surrounded by professionals. And I know that we come from a place of privilege. Being able to provide Kaylin with a SWAT team was because we had privilege and resources. But I would say do whatever it takes to get what you need, and don't let anyone tell you what you need. You know what you need. Kaylin's experience was different than mine because she was very good at articulating, this is what I need, and very good about saying, I still need those resources. So I would say that just there isn't a one size fits all for recovery. It truly is your own personal journey, but don't lose hope. That is the bottom line. Don't lose hope. It will come. It will happen. And if someone needs someone to be their person, I'm here. Right?
Yeah, thank you.
If I may jump in,
Yes.
congratulations. Good job, Mom. I mean, your trauma turned into wisdom for your daughter that probably helped her realize this is the type of help that I need. And had you not been so transparent and candid with your kids, that might not have happened. Being a parent is hard to be transparent and be so open. Well done. You've made me a better parent as a result of hearing your story. So thank you.
Well, I got lots of other things wrong, but I would say we maybe got this one right.
Sure did.
There we go. So the final question I have for both of you, I'm going to ask Kaylin first. What do you do on a daily basis to stay mentally and emotionally strong?
Well, I surround myself with a team of really good supports. Like my parents, I have access to amazing healthcare workers. I see both a social worker and a woman who guides me in meditation and emotional freedom technique. That I both use both of those in my everyday routine to help keep myself calm and happy and my mind cleared. But I also just make sure that I surround myself with people who not only know my story, but appreciate what I've been through and are willing to listen at any given time.
And then Heather, I'll ask you the same question.
Well, I didn't cope so well in the beginning. As I mean, anyone that saw a picture of me from when my kids were little, I really soothed my soul with food. But about 7 years ago, as I said, I found I had a woman come into my life that just kept saying 5 things, and it was gratitude and sleep, nutrition, exercise, and hydration. And she drilled those into my head to the point where those are daily things that help me stay grounded. And I think there's a little piece of me that says, I'm going to show you and prove to you, that kind of encourages me to just keep going and to say, I can do this. I need to do this. But I would say it's really just taking life in a balance. And gratitude is the very first thing. I have so much, regardless of the trauma, there is so much in my life to be grateful for that I don't ever want to lose the balance or the perspective of the gratitude. I don't want to lose it to the trauma again.
Definitely. So thank you very much for sharing. What a wonderful episode. I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa, who's going to take us home. But thanks to you both for being open and honest, and we really appreciate your courage.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amani.
Speaking of gratitude, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your story. Again, I know that this sparked healing for people who are watching. Social media is blowing up right now, and so you'll get a chance to hear some of the gratitude that the viewers have for you sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. It's been an honor. Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you. So 1 week from now, every Monday at noon Central Time for the next 5 weeks, we will air community keynotes. So make sure you tune in next week to get a chance to hear from Chris Ashade. She has a really remarkable story about healing, recovery, and overcoming fear. And so make sure you tune in. We'll see you again next week. Take care, everyone.